What's up, guys? It's your boy. We tested positive for the vid. We tested positive for being sick.
Who's there? Connecting rod. That's good.
We are pretty sick. But we're good. Downside is I can't work. The upside is we got the canvas material. Canvas material came. We also got the stuff needed to install the snap buttons onto it. So we're gonna play with that later. We'll cut off a piece and play around with the sewing machine settings and do a test piece, both with sewing and getting one of those buttons installed on it. But first, we're actually gonna go over everything wrong with the Silver Rabbit, because we got to get it up on jack stands. Straighten out the exhaust on this thing. As you can see, it's not sitting centered. It's banging around on something underneath, and it's also trashing and beating up the rear valance there. So we've got to straighten it out. And, you know, obviously the valance, we don't want that getting trashed, but we also don't want the exhaust getting a hole rubbed through it. And it's annoying as all hell to be driving and hearing it bouncing off of the bottom of the car. Now is a good time to show you guys the wonderful CIS problem that we have to figure out. I've already tried a few small things on it, found a few things wrong under the hood. This is the cold start issue we're experiencing. The car does not want to hold idle when you first start it. It doesn't matter if you give it gas, revs will come up a little bit, but when even with your foot staying on the gas a little bit, it's kind of non-responsive, the pedal anyways. It eventually bogs down and dies out anyway. I'll show you guys what I did find wrong under the hood so far, what I did fix, but that's kind of what we're dealing with. You get a little bit of response out of the gas pedal at first, and then if you try pedaling it, it'll still stall out. If you just start it without touching the gas pedal, it'll eventually do the same thing. So it wants to stall real bad right there. On a colder day, you got to give it a good solid 5 minutes to warm it up. A day like today, it feels like it's almost 80 degrees in the sun. It's nice and warm out today. It'll only take a minute or two. So right now the gas pedal is relatively unresponsive. So that's that neat problem. Combination of too big of a cam maybe, and some stuff that still needs to get fixed under the hood, and or some CIS tuning that it desperately needs. In the meantime, until I have the time to bring the car to Becker, we're gonna poke around under the hood and see what else we can find wrong before we waste anybody's time. You know, there's no point trying to tune something that's half broken anyways. All right, so first and foremost, don't be this guy. Do not jack your car up from the pinch welds. Make sure you check the video in the upper thing here, or somewhere on the screen is the button to click, or check the link in the description for the video I did about the jacking points and where you should and shouldn't jack these cars up at, because if you do this, you're an ass. Look, this is what happens. It starts to rust, the paint cracks. As you can see, it just speeds up the process, and these cars don't need any help getting rusty. We're definitely missing a hanger up here, though I'm not too concerned about that. The exhaust actually doesn't shake too much.
What?
How about that? Isn't that amazing?
You junk?
You can also see it's just hanging too low. It's the lowest point of the car by a whole lot. So we actually have some room up in this tunnel that we could tuck this up better. This clamp, as you can see, is also hitting the ground at points, so we're gonna go ahead and rotate this clamp up. Anytime you're trying to align your exhaust on one of these cars, start at the front and work your way back, because everything up here will affect how the tip comes out the back. That clamp up there is loosened, the one on the muffler is loosened. You'll see as I rotate this, it moves closer and further away from the car. You're gonna get stuff is out of a line, and then it's also gonna be hanging as your low point on the car. So we're just gonna go ahead and twist this up. Too close, you'll also be hitting the bottom of the car. So you gotta get that sweet spot, and you can clamp it down. I believe this is a 2.5-inch exhaust, which is massive compared to the stock. Stock is about half this size, if not less. I know some people have fit 3-inch exhaust, but 2.5-inch is the biggest you can buy off the shelf. It's a little extra important on this bigger exhaust that everything fits exactly where it should, because otherwise you'll be having it bounce off the car, which makes noise inside the car, because if it bounces off something for long enough, then it eventually wears through and you'll get an exhaust leak. And then lastly, it becomes the low point of your car if it's hanging like mine was. Take your time, make sure this is lined up properly. Like I said, start from the front, move back. You'll probably have to snug stuff down and then recheck, make sure you got enough wiggle room in all directions. One last thing to keep in mind is as metal gets hot, it expands. So it's another reason why it's important to leave a little bit of wiggle room in all directions. You might have to adjust this more than once. This is sitting a little too close to the rear beam. As it gets hot and expands, that might start to rub on the rear beam. So we'll see about what we could do in the back here to pull this pipe up a little bit higher. Okay, so I got a little carried away yesterday because I ended up taking the majority of the system off the car, and I know I should have filmed this, so sorry that I didn't. But when I was trying to get more room around the rear beam here, the exhaust was hitting the strap for the fuel tank there. But that's because the exhaust itself is set too far back. The flex pipe and the flange up there really should have been mounted another inch or two closer to the engine. So we're gonna have to take this off and shorten it and remount it up. Sorry if this all seems redundant or annoying to listen to, but this is all important, especially if you're gonna go mount one of these exhaust systems for the first time. Be mindful of how far forward or back you mount it, because you've got a few different clearance points that matter. Too far forward or back, you won't be able to get that midsection to tuck up into the tunnel better. As you can see, the exhaust is still sitting way too close to the ground, and the actual fix for that's going to be getting it mounted closer to the engine, so we get a little more room for adjustment back here. I mean, considering this thing's shaking and now apparently squirting like my girlfriend on a Friday night, we're doing pretty good for 2.5 inches crammed up in here. So yeah, that's as good as it's gonna get. Still not ideal, but we got a little bit more clearance around the balance now, so we'll stop beating that up. So, as far as everything else wrong with this car, now, we've mentioned a few times cold start, CIS, it's got a running issue. Two of the first things I found when I started digging right under the hood: one, the vacuum advance was disconnected altogether. We just had this little stubby piece of vacuum hose tucked and hidden over to the side there, and the port for the intake manifold where it would plug into was capped off. I ran out of vacuum line, so don't mind this little ghetto jumper piece I got going on there. And I also found that the wires plugging into this sensor both wires were completely exposed and touching each other. The thermo time switch, something or another, it has something to do with the coolant temperature, and it reads it and sends it to do science and shit. It's very important, as Becker was explaining to me. I was almost positive that between those two things, that was going to be the majority of the issue, if not help it run a little bit better. Had absolutely no effect on the issue. So either way, those things needed to get fixed. I was able to pull back this rubber boot and extend the wires a bit and salvage this plug. So it seems at some point somebody kind of rerouted a bunch of the wires in here to kind of clean up and tidy it up, give it kind of a little bit of a tucked look. Like, yes, it does look good, but the downside is you get all these wires rubbing on things where they shouldn't rub against, and plugs get pulled super tight. So basically what I'm getting at is there's all sorts of little kinked wires I have to still find and fix. Just been slowly chipping away at that. I haven't even grazed the surface of actually messing with CIS, and I'm not gonna. If I finish going through and fixing what I can on here and then bring it to Nick and he can't get it to run any better, we might put a set of dual carbs on this. And that's only because I do have a really nice set of Webers that would look great in here and help clean this up even more, and it would give us the chance to do a proper carb conversion video too. I am going to give this our best shot at making sure this runs well, because CIS is always going to be better than a carburetor. I've said that before. I said that in the carburetor video. You shouldn't convert if you don't have to. If you can get your CIS running well, it's always going to be better than a carburetor. And this car is still very much drivable. You know, I got 5 minutes of fussing with it to get it started, and then past that it runs great. So that doesn't mean we should just rip it all out, and you know, the little bit of trouble that we do have with it does not warrant ripping it all out and putting carburetors on here. All in all, everything's in real great shape under the hood. I mean, the running issue is the main thing. I got some tidying up to do with wires and checking over, finding any other broken stuff under here. There's an issue with the headlights. The high beams don't work, or they only work on the high beam setting. That's something related to the inside. I've only dealt with this on my late Westie on the sport truck. If I remember correctly, it was the stalk on the sport truck that gave me that same issue. I feel like I've seen people saying the ignition switch can even cause that, because there's a whole mess of wires that come into the ignition switch and, you know, bounce off of there and go to other components under the dash. So headlight switch itself can even cause problems. Either way, before I start throwing parts at it, I'm going to double check and read through the forums a bit and see if there's any suggestions before I just start wasting money or time swapping parts out. One of the most important things wrong with the car right now is the cluster. None of the gauges work. I mean, granted, there's only 3 gauges if you don't include the clock, but I mean, the clock works. The speedo, I just found that the cable wasn't plugged in. I just plugged that back in. We'll see if that works when I go down the road. If it doesn't, then that means the gear in the speedo is broken. I don't know if it's the same fix as the late Westies, but we'll look into that. If it still doesn't work, then we'll have to mess with the cluster or replace it. At least 50% of Mark 1s driving on the road don't have working speedos anyways. More importantly, the gas gauge doesn't work, and more important than that, the coolant temperature gauge doesn't work. So as far as the gas gauge, that's either going to be the cluster itself, maybe the ribbon is fried, which will also explain the coolant temperature. But the other thing that could be causing the gas gauge to not work is the sender in the tank. I have a new one on the shelf, so we'll see about getting that swapped out eventually. I daily drove the sport truck for many years without a working gas gauge, so that doesn't bother me much. The coolant temperature, that needs to get fixed, and like I said, that could either be the ribbon on the cluster itself or something with the wiring or the sensor itself. The wipers are intermittent, but as I drive the car and actually use them more, they seem to be working better. For those who've been asking for another video on it, at least I figured I'd show you guys a good scope of the things wrong with it, which, as you guys see, is not a whole lot. Once it's registered, it's going to be the daily, so you guys will see some more video of it at some point, but this is pretty much all I got for now.